folks, welcome to Our City Matters. Today we have an important topic, and it is about PACE assessment system of some sort. I'm not quite sure exactly what it all means, but we have two experts here in the state that know quite a bit about it. And we have Marie Banfield from Cornerstone Action, and she's the education liaison there. And we have Doris Hohensee, who is the chair of New Hampshire Families for Education. So welcome, girls, and we're going to get on with this topic. We only have a half hour.
Okay. Sounds
so
good.
Appreciate you being here, because this is quite important. For the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of chatter about what has come into two schools in Manchester, which is the Parker Varney and the Gossler Park schools. Now, what's the fury here?
Well, they weren't supposed to be on the list. Back in March, there were 4 other schools that were coming online for PACE. PACE is Performance Assessment Competency Education. It's a mnemonic for what they do is they take Smarter Balance and they chop it up into little pieces. They call it ALDs, Achievement Level Descriptors, and they weave it into little assessments with the help of some regional consortium that they have of nonprofits in other districts, and then it gets approved by the state, and they pretend it's all locally designed. So you have these little mini Smarter Balance into your curriculum, and instead of evaluating the school once a year, like the state law says, we're now evaluating students, grading students.
That's a big shift from Smarter Balance.
But they're not even being public about it, because Manchester was not on the list. They had 4 other schools. They had 4 last year: Rochester, Sanborn Regional, Sohegan, and Epping. This year there were 4 new schools. It's part of the waiver. It is not approved by the state legislature. In fact, the state legislature said no in House Bill 323. They said, no way, we're not approving this. So anyway, Concord has it for the entire district, and Manchester now has it in. They've publicized on the department website that it's 1 district, but in fact it's 2. And the school board didn't vote on it. The subcommittee, the curriculum committee, didn't vote on it. They were informed, because at one point the commissioner came down and said, well, you're not interested in Smarter Balance. We have the program for you. It's called PACE. You have less testing, which was a lie. And don't you want it? Well, of course I want it. I want less testing. So, okay, they're interested. Slam, now you've got it. That's about what we've got in Manchester. That's crazy.
Yeah, it might help to go back to last year when we were kind of introduced to the PACE assessments. You know, there's been an issue and there's been a problem with the Smarter Balance assessment in all of the schools, whether it be in New Hampshire or in other states where they're using Smarter Balance also. So Smarter Balance is the one-time standardized assessment given in the spring. Many of your parents opted out their children or refused to let their children take it because it has no bearing on the students. It's not an achievement test. This is a psychometric assessment of their values, attitudes, and beliefs with some academic component to it.
That we're not allowed to see.
Yeah,
that's a big thing. For 20 years, we're
right.
not allowed to see
Exactly,
tests.
because other states that used assessments in the past, like Massachusetts has used the MCAS, they would release those test questions every year so parents could see them. There's no transparency with this Smarter Balance assessment. The test questions have not been released, although we do have a state statute that says that parents have the right to see these questions, and they should certainly start asking to see the questions and the answers if their children took it. But every year, the students were supposed to take the Smarter Balance, be 11th grade, and I think it's 4 through 8 or
3
through 8.
So it's 7 years.
So 7 years. Because it's become so controversial, because this is an assessment that nobody really has any trust in, it's not going to tell you whether your child's proficient in math and English, and because so many parents were pulling out, I think there was this fear amongst bureaucrats that, oh no, you know, we're not going to have anybody participating in this. We've got to come up with something else that almost forces compliance. And I think the PACE assessment is their tool to force parents to comply and force their children to take the assessments. Because when Doris and I both attended hearings in Concord on pulling out Smarter Balance, this was done by the Department of Education in New Hampshire, and putting in these PACE assessments, First of all, the way they did it was so underhanded. There was legislation that Doris had mentioned, HB 323, and it just called for new assessments, and it didn't identify PACE. So when it passed the House Education Committee and went to the floor, nobody really knew what this
It
meant.
was a floor amendment at the last minute
Right,
by
so-
voice vote because nobody read it.
Exactly. So
Isn't that
on the floor
wonderful?
of the House, they introduced Representative Rick Ladd, House Chairman of the House Education Committee, introduces an amendment. Oh, by the way, we're gonna identify these assessments, and they're called PACE assessments. Well, nobody had looked at this. Nobody knew what they were. Nobody had done any research or investigation because we had never seen this before. This was all done behind closed doors.
And before the waiver was released.
Right.
The
Right.
waivers where they defined and explained
The
PACE.
No Child Left
'cause
Behind
we
waiver.
didn't know what PACE was until we
Right.
read the waiver.
Right. So
That came out in May.
So they want to introduce these new assessments. Nobody has any idea about them. Again, we're going to go from one experiment with Smarter Balance to another experiment with PACE instead of using the tried and true achievement test like a Stanford achievement test or a California achievement test or the Iowa basic skills test, achievement tests that actually tell parents proficiency. They're going to introduce these other assessments. So, and then the funny part about it, or the extremely strange part about it, is their excuse was, we want to reduce testing, as Doris had said. And Doris and I are looking at each other like, how do you take one time a year standardized test out, introduce PACE assessments, which are, from what we understood, weekly assessments, and call that a reduction? I mean, is that fuzzy math now? I mean, how do you take away one, introduce multiple assessments, and say we're going to reduce testing? So right then we knew something
The other
was
thing
up.
is it's breaking the law. Those four
Yes.
districts last year broke 193C. They didn't administer the Smarter Balance in 4 of those years that they're required to do.
Right.
And the commissioner didn't get approval from the legislature, and she says, go ahead, 4 more districts, let's break the law there too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we're looking at this going, okay, first of all, and by the way, 323 never passed.
It did pass, but it
passed
was
the House.
greatly modified by the
Right.
Senate.
Yes, that's
where
true.
you had Senator Reagan, bless his heart, on the floor saying, I can't even believe the information I'm getting from the department. He didn't say that they lied, but he didn't say that they ever tell him the truth.
Right,
So he
right.
said he was misled. He had recommended in committee that we pass 323, and he said, no, it needs to be amended, and he
Right.
can't even support it in its amended form.
Right. So
But
PACE was taken out of that language. It was added in the House, and then it was taken out. And that's what I meant about it didn't pass.
PACE didn't
323 ended up passing, but what didn't pass was the PACE assessment. So even the legislators, by the time it got to the Senate, because it was they slipped it through in the House. By the time it got to the Senate, they had heard from so many parents, so many concerned individuals that they said, okay, they listened,
It was wonderful.
Thankfully,
It was
they
very
listened,
good.
the senators listened, and then made sure that part was removed. The part that stayed into 323, was the SATs were going to replace the Smarter Balance in 11th grade.
actually, it says SATs or ACTs,
Or
in
ACTs,
statute.
right,
Yeah.
right. So 323 did end up passing, but PACE was removed. So even the legislature did not accept the PACE assessments because I think the controversy that surrounds them, the lack of transparency, the uproar amongst parents. Parents want to make sure that they can pull their kids out, like the Smarter Balance assessment. A lot of
The
parents
big
pull
thing
their
to
kids out.
understand is the legislature doesn't have any clue what these competencies are about, because they put in competencies, a definition in 2 different places, 2 different chapters, more like an extended learning opportunity, that it provides flexibility. Not, this is the mechanism by which we're going to now stand education on its head. That is not in there. Those legislators, you can pick any one of the 400, any one of the 24 senators, they don't know. They don't know they didn't pass this. So now, because we define the word competency in 2 different places, then the department went back and it has 100 pages of rules, ED 306, that goes gangbusters on these competencies. But it's only competency-based education, not the grading. Now we have the grading in our schools.
Yeah.
It's not required. And the other thing about 306, I would love a legal opinion on this. 306 says the Common Core standards, which they call college and career ready, that's the baseline. You can meet or exceed them, but you do not have to put them in because we have local control. So we cannot force that on your curriculum. Now they have competencies. Wouldn't be the same thing? We can't force them on your, but kind of meet or exceed them in a more abstract, general way because a competency is just a goal. So set your goals and meet or exceed them. Why is everybody going into these contorted 1, 2, 3, 4, putting in competency-based grading, flipping everything on its head? Oh, this is mandated. We have a deadline. We have to put this in. The cheerleading squad is the New Hampshire School Boards Association. They meet once a month. All the school board superintendents, or not the school board, the district superintendents, and the commissioner comes in and gives her marching orders, and then she sends her regional liaisons to the districts, and they give marching orders to the supers, the principals, and the curriculum specialists, and they're telling them there, because it's not written anywhere except in this waiver, and only, broadly, how to implement this thing that was never passed by the legislature.
Right.
And here we have it in Congress.
State and local control, then maybe you should be elected and we can elect you out. We can elect somebody in who's going to stand up for the people and say, you know what, I'm not going to sell off local
Or at
and
least
state
they'd
control.
be more likely to listen because
Yes.
they know we're the people that vote for them in or out.
Yeah. And, back to the PACE assessments, in Bedford, for instance, the superintendent has refused to use the PACE assessments, unlike the superintendent in Manchester. And during one of the school board meetings, he explained to the school board why he did not want to use the PACE assessments. And the reason he gave, and I'm going to summarize it, as this is a verbatim quote, but he summarized it in this: the PACE assessments means that in the past, your teachers would maybe come up with testing on their own. They're going to teach, they understand the subject well, they're going to teach it, and then they're going to test their kids to make sure that they understand the material. When you use the PACE assessments, the teachers have to collaborate with other school districts to come up with the competencies, to come up with the testing. So now you're losing you hire your teachers so that they can use their expertise. Now you're kind of losing that in the process. So that was one of the reasons why Bedford chose not to do it. He said he wanted his teachers coming up with any kind of tests or assessments on their children versus having to give that control up to this kind of collaborated group.
And that's another place where she breaks the law because the legislature only said a competency is a flexible tool. The rules, the minimum standards, ED 306, says they're district-wide competencies. Now, if you want to do PACE, they're statewide. You have to do statewide. So you have to volunteer for this program, otherwise you don't get your money? How's that right? I mean, it's like everything takes you up one more ratchet and losing your control.
Right.
So did Bedford not take the new grading system that Manchester has taken? Like, are they maintaining the Carnegie units?
I think no, because everybody has competencies now.
So it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
No. The grading
But the grading is different.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. I don't know if Bedford has done the grading. That's something I'm not sure about.
But that's not state law.
Right.
That's not anywhere but the waiver.
Right.
So in Nashua, the superintendent told the board that it was under state law. We corrected him, but he's got that push forward, and we're in the process of putting it in. But that is not state law. That is
Right.
not required.
So you don't have to use the grading system. However, it seems like that's coming, as a package deal, and it's coming into your school. And a lot of we heard from parents in Rochester, from Timberlane. Timberlane parents are I think it's Timberlane. I could be wrong about that, but I've heard from parents in other districts who have said, what is this about? Why are we going to this new grading system that shifts away from A, B, C, D, E to this kind of numerical thing? And the reason why I think it's important to mention why they want to go with this kind of new grading system is because in the past, you had a grading system that would grade students pretty objectively, meaning that you took a math test. If you got them wrong, this is how many you got wrong,
Right.
and you can grade it on an ABC. It's
Percentages.
very objective. With competencies focus on a student's attitudes, values, and beliefs. That's very subjective. And if you were to get, let's say, a kind of a cranky teacher, there's bad apples in every profession, and once in a while you come across a a bad teacher maybe that shouldn't even be teaching. But, in the past, the teacher would kind of put comments on a report card. And, kind of explaining, okay, maybe your student is not studying, or, your child could do this better. But it wasn't really part of their grade. It was, the grade was pretty objective, and the comments were more of a subjective nature, and wasn't part of their grading. Now with competencies, it's kind of a mixture.
Oh my goodness.
And Nashua, that we don't have it as a mixture. We had the conduct grade, and it's more descriptive now. They've taken conduct, and they're really getting down into why the student is where he is. But the problem with the competencies that I'm seeing, and again, since it's not defined in statute or state regulations anywhere clearly, it's again this backdoor, whatever's coming in through the superintendents and the commissioner. I'm seeing that they have these goals or the competencies, and it could just be the Common Core standards. I asked for a chart for Common Core in each one of the standards and the competencies. What was added or subtracted when they're making the competencies, and I want a chart. I haven't seen it yet, but I want to see each of the Common Core standards and what did they add or subtract when they created a competency. And are they, what kind of a range of, that's what I want to see. Is it a one-to-one correspondence or not?
Right. Well, a lot of the competencies are because I think parents assume that, okay, competency means that my child's competent in this subject. And again, it can be very subjective. It could be, is your child collaborating enough? Again, so
that's the 21st century skills.
So now you're trying to judge something in a subjective manner. What kind of attitude did they have when they're collaborating and things like that. So it's not an objective way to objectively score a student. So that's what I mean about, how it's kind of molded together now. And that's why they want to go to this kind of numerical system, because it's tough. When you are grading a math test, for instance, and a parent says, why did you give my child a D? You can pull out that paper.
You don't get anything below a C- now. You're in remediation.
Right. So you can show that. You can show the parent, well, here's what, we tested, and here's what they got wrong. Now it's, why did you give my child a 1, 2, 3, 4? Well, it's tougher to say, well, I gave him a D. You can't pull that out. You can't show them. It's very subjective.
What Manchester ought to do, and same with Nashua and other districts that are using, is ask, historically, how many students did get D's or below? And what are we getting now? Because you can't get below a C-. How many students are in remediation that weren't necessarily in it before?
Right.
Are we encouraging them to sloth and, I'll remediate later? Or are we actually improving something?
Yeah, and to pick up on that, because Doris identified something I completely forgot about, is with competency-based education, you can take and retake these assessments until you finally pass them, and then you're allowed to move on.
Is that called mastery?
Well, that's what they may call it. The problem is again, it creates this this mechanism almost that allows for students to become lazy. And you'll hear that from parents, if you have a really...
I've heard that from parents,
Yeah,
especially with boys.
Exactly.
Because it's hard to motivate a boy, smart boy.
Exactly.
It's like, well,
Why
I'll
should
just
I bother
study
with
for
the
one
first
test,
test?
I'll make up the other one and remediate the third one.
And
I don't
why
have to-
bother on those first and second when I know I'm going to get the third and the fourth down the road? So you have this student who tries really hard, gets great grades, looking at this going, why am I trying so hard on the first test when they learn how to work the system?
I'm going to get more chances later.
Yeah, I can party tonight and make it up later.
And do it later. So you're instilling this kind of bad behavior in students, and then at
Well,
the
it's
same
good that
time,
they're adaptive. I like to see it.
and they're saying, well, but we want these kids to master these things before they move on. So if they flunk it, have they really learned it? Again, I go back to saying, but some of these competencies have nothing to do with academics. Some of them have to do with, are they creative enough, collaborating? Do they have the right
them now is
attitudes?
characteristics of a 21st century
Yes.
learner or something like that. So,
And there's a list of those.
Yeah.
and they all
character
sound so good. Why
traits.
would you not want them?
Yeah. Well, and I will go back to an example because, now that we have it in New Hampshire, I'll go back to the example of what Bedford did several years ago, because this has been in the Bedford schools. The competencies are in the Bedford schools because pretty much every school is, thanks to the Department of Education putting that into the rules. And that, a perfect example is in the personal finance class in Bedford. In the past, you learned academics on personal finance, what does simple interest mean, how to calculate it, compound interest, those kind of things that you would think would come from a personal finance class. And then several years ago, we had parents in Bedford that brought to the attention of the board a book called Nickel and Dime, How You Can't Make It in America. And so as you peeled back the layers, you found that this book met a competency. But when you looked at the competency, it wasn't academic. This book itself wasn't even based on personal finance. It was based on a political agenda.
Well, I think you've got to go back to the fact that state regulations currently say that they're district competencies. So the state shouldn't be telling us
Right.
how to set our goals.
Right.
And the school boards need to be on top of this to say, okay, we've always set goals. We'll call them competencies now, but we're in control. Instead of deferring, and what kind of competencies do you want us to put in?
Well, we should probably mention, too, that a couple months ago in the State Board of Education meeting, the gentleman who helps make up these actual tests, these assessments, brought up that in that board meeting that he's hearing from schools who are telling him that they want the state to make up the competencies. So again, if they're local now, you get the feeling that at some point they're all going to be
So it's
they're going to be
size.
something on the shelf. and
One
everybody's
size
gonna pull
fits
them up.
all. We're standardizing education
Yes.
for all.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So it's deceptive when you say PACE is locally designed,
Yeah.
but it has to be using these tools and
Right.
state approved and developed regionally and even graded regionally. You don't just grade them yourself. They have to be a regionally agreed upon grading mechanism.
Yeah.
And they're doing that in the districts. They're saying these competencies are good because each department, district-wide,
Right.
has to agree upon, so everybody does the same thing.
so folks listening today, they're
Lockstep.
asking the question, why? Is this helpful to students? Is this good for America? Okay.
Yeah.
Why? Is it because the Department of Labor now has taken over our schools, basically for their purposes? The graduation rates, they need higher graduation rates. And so project-based learning or this 21st century skills rather than academics, the more the conduct is being accentuated here and graded, so that kids come out ready for the workforce. What do they call that? College and career ready, right? Is this
Yeah.
all what it's all?
Well, and I want to make sure that we're clear that we're not against testing. We grew up with taking
Or
standardized
college or
tests.
career ready. But
Yeah.
why is there only one method of getting there?
Yeah.
Used to be a lot of different methods. It was called innovation, and then
Right.
some schools would stand out.
Yep.
And then others would come out and say, well, I can do this, and then we're even better. But you're not going to have that jostling anymore. It's
So we have about 1 minute
stagnation.
left. So now all our schools are becoming equal. So it doesn't matter. You live in Bedford. You're paying high taxes for your schools. Okay? You're not going to get a better product in Bedford necessarily with those taxes than anyone else in the state, wherever they live, in the property tax bill. You know what I'm saying? So now I think parents are going to start saying, well, if I buy a house in Bedford, my kid's not going to be any more well educated than if we buy in Manchester.
If everything becomes standardized. I think, in the past that we used standardized testing, like when we grew up, as kind of this outside glimpse, okay, an independent glimpse of how well our kids or our schools were doing. You'd come in, you'd
It
take
was
the
a
test.
snapshot. It
was a
didn't take over
snapshot.
your whole
Didn't take
curriculum.
exactly. Didn't take over everything. And, we got to look at and if we thought we could improve, we could talk to the school board, we could talk to the administrators and say, look, our test scores didn't come out so well. This is an achievement test. These kids should know this material. Let's work on it
What's
together.
lacking in the schools? or
Now
we need,
it's completely
Parents are not
rough-
involved
right.
anymore.
The state is telling them what to do. The federal government's telling the state what to do, and parents have lost their voice in this process. So it's not that we're against testing. It's just that let's do it in a productive way.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up here, and we can get together again, let's say more into the legislative term,
Yeah, that
and
would be
see what's
interesting.
going on with the legislature and the battles that are going to take place there. So we'll have you on again
Sounds good.
in a few months after the holidays, and so we're grateful that they're here, Marie Banfield and Doris Hohensee, and they'll be with us next time again on Our City Matters. Take care.